All right, Alexander, we are here with Stanislav joining us once again on the Duran, so we can talk about what is happening on the front lines in Ukraine. So, Stanislav, before we get started, where can people follow your work?
Okay, so on YouTube, I have a channel called Mr. Slavic Man, and that's a K instead of a C. On Telegram, I have a Russian channel, Stas Today Обратно, and English channel, Stas was there.
All right, definitely follow Stanislav's work. I will have a link to his channels in the description box down below and as a pinned comment as well. Alexander, let's discuss what is happening on the front lines with Stanislav.
Indeed, we should, because in fact, one of the most interesting things I've noticed about the media in the West is that they've stopped talking about the front lines very much. It used to be the case that I remember back in 2022, 2023, it was full of it. I remember The Guardian. Every day they had live updates on the war. I noticed that they no longer do that at all. But of course, the reality is that things are happening on the front lines. What they do talk about, and constantly, is these catastrophic Russian losses that we're supposed to be experiencing. That the Russian army is losing 1 or 2 or 3,000 men a day. There was an article by a man called Michael Clark, for example, in the Telegraph. You might know about him. He goes a lot on British television as well, in which he spoke about how Russian losses are huge, but it won't stop the Russians still advancing. Anyway, perhaps we can get some real information. So Stanislav, can you perhaps give us a quick overview? I'll tell you what I basically feel is happening now, which is that over the course of 2024, early 2025, the Russians came right bang up to the really key places in Donbass, the 3 cities, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Pokrovsk. And that what we're going to see over the next couple of weeks and months probably is the battle for those 3 cities really begin. But that's my own sense. Maybe you can fill out the details and tell us whether or not you think that's right.
Yes, it is. Well, first of all, recently, Chasiv Yar is basically all but fallen. That was a key fortress. The citadel is falling. What's left of the Ukrainian forces are going to have to either choose stay in place and die, run for it, and majority will still die because they're running across open land. So throw away the heavy equipment and make a bolt for it, or surrender. No, the intelligent thing would be surrender. But as we've seen in places like in Kursk, a lot of them decided to stay and fight. And were destroyed in turn. The monastery, of course, at the monastery, there were a lot of former inmates, murderers, rapists that had been committing murder and rape. So they knew surrendering for them was going to be still a death sentence. Either way, they weren't going to exactly be greeted with open arms. The airborne troops tried to surrender.
This is the monastery in Kursk region. This is the one near Gornal, yeah.
Yeah, Gornal was... Now, I mean, the monasteries are built like fortresses. If you've never been to a Russian Orthodox monastery, especially the older ones that are built out of... The really older ones are not even built out of bricks. They're built out of stone blocks. We're talking, stone blocks about that thick. So you're looking at 1 to 2 meter thick walls. So yes, they're built like a fortress. And they were fortresses. They have exterior walls. Historically, they were fortresses because while the monks lived there, those were the places that the people ran to whenever there were raiders coming in from the various steppe tribes, and they'd hide behind the walls. So these were actually additionally to fortresses, even though they may not have had a specific garrison, but they also served that secondary role. So they were built that way, as opposed to most other cities that were built basically or towns open. So yeah, that was a very big strong point that they took. Plus, I think there's a good element of Satanism involved because what they do in these for supposedly Orthodox people, a lot of them were never Orthodox or have gone away from Orthodoxy or have surrendered their souls because the things that they do in those monasteries is reminiscent of what the Bolsheviks did back in the 1920s, early 20s particularly, when they were trying to destroy the church. I mean, that is exactly what they're doing. sacrilege on all levels. As far as the rest, now, Slavansk, Kramatorsk, there is going to be a battle there, but it's not going to be a head-on battle the way most people, if they're looking at a map, are going to think it's going to be, because that's a suicide battle. Kramatorsk and Slavyansk are situated higher ground than what is east of them. So it's fighting your way up. The battle to look at is Krasnolimon. The Russian forces are moving back into Limon. Historically, that's exactly how it fell during World War II. That's how it was looking to fall during 22, before the retreat from Kharkov, because there's just not enough troops to cover that area. Partially true, but also because of the retreat, they pulled out the Iron Fist, Ukrainian Iron Fist that was hiding in Kharkov in parking garages, places like that. They had to come out to do battle in eastern Ukraine and were destroyed, heavily attrited. Even though they gained ground, they were heavily attrited. Now the wave is going back, and there's movement toward Krasnolimon. Not that far anymore. I mean, it's coming pretty close. Krasnolimon sits higher than the others, right? It's on a much higher ground, and it's to the northwest even a little bit. You take that and you start coming down south, downwards, because you're moving from high ground to lower ground to hit Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. So it's easier logistics. It's easier to attack because you're attacking downward, not upward. You put pressure in from the east, and then you do the death stroke from the northwest, and that also cuts their main supply lines into those two cities. So that's a battle to look forward to. Look to the north, just a little bit to the north and northwest of Kramatorsk. That's where the main attack is going to come from. Once Krasnolimon falls, the days of Slaviansk and Kramatorsk are numbered. And Slaviansk is a very big moral point where I think they're going to do a lot to try to hold it, because that's the first big spark of the revolt. Before the revolt, so people just understand this. Before the actual revolt, and all the volunteers came in, both the volunteers living in eastern Ukraine and volunteers in Russia.
Can I just quickly say, this is the revolt that took place in 2014. This is the original uprising that took place directly after the seizure of power in Kiev by the Maidan forces. There was an uprising in eastern Ukraine, and it originated and was centered on Slavyansk. Just to take it from there.
Well, that's the point, though. There was actually some time between the Maidan revolution and this revolt. And during that time, yes, there were demonstrations all over eastern Ukraine. And what the eastern Ukrainians, I'm not going to talk about Crimea. Crimea is a whole different entity. It was autonomous to begin with. Yeltsin was even offered to take Crimea, but he refused. I guess he was in an alcoholic stupor at the moment, pretty much every day. So that was a lost opportunity. But like a lot of lost opportunities during Yeltsin. But those eastern provinces rebelled originally for one thing. They weren't demanding to join Russia. They weren't demanding independence. They were demanding federalization. Because to understand what that means is, they didn't elect their governors. The governors were oligarchs that were giving feeding grounds. This is your province. You feed off of it. 2/3 of the money goes to Kiev. You keep 1/3 of the money. Do whatever the hell you want. Basically a feudal system. Here's your barony. Do with it what you want, but you make sure you feed the king up top. And that's exactly how Eastern Ukraine functioned. Well, all of Ukraine functioned, really. The East rose up demanding federalization, election of governors, saying where the taxes went and how they were spent. Standard things in the U.S., standard things in Germany, standard things in a lot of countries. But for some reason, the standard federalized West decided that, no, they didn't like that, so let's go crush it through our proxies. Well, we know why. I mean, obviously, I'm being sarcastic. So that was, Slavyansk was the first real explosive point. But before that, what was happening was, during these demonstrations, the SBU, which we know from, again, New York Times a year ago, the present SBU is nothing like the SBU before 2014. Quite the vast majority of the officers of the SBU were fired. Quite a few of them were arrested. All new people were brought in by the CIA and MI6, and they created this terrorist organization, which is the modern SBU, this terrorist Gestapo-type organization that both has internal concentration camps for any dissent and carry out savage terrorist attacks in other areas. and which, by the way, is going to be a headache for Europe for the next decades to come, because these people are going to spread to organized crime. They're going to spread to, and they already have, and so on and so on. So Europe is creating a cancer for itself that's not going to go away anytime soon. And they're also very much linked with Islamic terrorism. They've been training Islamic terrorists in Africa, in Syria. So this is going to be a big headache. So what they were doing is, during these demonstrations, they would send in their agents, videotape the demonstration, and they pose as part of the demonstration, figure out who the heads were, and then murder. And they're finding bodies in the woods outside of Kharkov, outside of Mariupol. These people were just being disappeared. And eventually that just exploded because the pressure was growing and people were understanding what was happening. They weren't being listened. Not only were they being listened to, they were being murderously suppressed. And then it just exploded. And Slavyansk was that first match that lit this whole fire that's been going for the last 11 years.
And this is now why the Russians are so invested in recapturing it, because it was the center, it was the actual focal point of the original resistance. Now, can you just explain to us this? What is the position of Chasiv Yar in all of this? Because south of Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, there's this other town, which is Konstantinovka. I've heard that it is in low ground relative to Chasiv Yar, and indeed Toretsk as well. Toretsk, I understand in Russian it's called Dzerzhinsk, but let's just call it Toretsk just to keep everybody clear as to what they are. But there seems to be an awful lot of fighting going on around these places, around, with Chasiv Yar, as you rightly say, it looks like it's basically over. Toretsk, it is over, as far as I can tell, despite attempts by the Ukrainians to keep it going in some form. But what is the importance of this battle, and what is the importance of Chasiv Yar relative to the rest of it?
Well, outside of the obvious PR battle, because we're dealing with an enemy that, number one, prioritizes PR, and thank God for that. Those areas are the final fortresses in central Ukraine on the front line of the main defensive line. Behind that are earthworks that have been thrown up over the last year, perhaps stands. You're looking at company, maybe battalion-sized strong points. But the point is, it's not a continuous strong line. This is a line. Chasiv Yar is a part of the line that they've been preparing for 11 years, pouring massive amounts of cement, concrete, or rather cement, preparing stock points for ordnance. And this is, once this falls, the fortifications behind it are not adequate enough to hold. They may slow down the advance somewhat, but they're not going to hold it. There's no way they're going to hold it. But what you get is basically you explode the central portion of the front. And in this case, you're able to cut off a lot of the supply heading to the southern portion of the front, toward Zaporozhye. And you also have a better chance of a deep encirclement of Pokrovsk to the north, Krasnoarmeysk. And Pokrovsk itself is a logistics point. Already it's been cut off. The logistic flow to the south has been cut off because Pokrovsk is cut off in the south. The north is partially encircled, but the northern routes, one of the reason Krasnoyarmon is coming under a lot of pressure is their supply lines are being cut. They're under fire. They're under tactical encirclement. So it's only a matter of time. Now, they've been throwing everything they can, especially in the southern pincer, as far as counterattacks. And while they've had, the VSU in this case, the Ukrainians, while they've had some local success, it's nothing that they can hold. So it's tactical level assaults with lots of losses. They'll grab a little piece here and there, but then they'll get kicked out. Then they'll grab it again. And it's back and forth. It has worked as far as slowing down the southern pincer, or actually even stopping its movement for now. But it's costing them so much to do it. It's not something that they can sustain. And all the victories are ethereal because they're losing those territories almost as fast as they're gaining them. But they keep throwing in the reserves, what reserves they have. Because to lose Pokrovsk, it's done. You've got basically a very fast run toward the Dnieper and toward the eastern Dnipropetrovsk. There's not a lot there. There's not a lot of villages you can form a line on. It's pretty open territory, steppe. There's not even that much farmland with the tree lines. So it becomes impossible to hold. I mean, you can hold strong points, but they'll just get walked around. Now, they're throwing a lot of drones in that area. I mean, massive amounts of drones. Drones are a major problem, and that's not under question. Russia's drone manufacturing is going up in folds, but unfortunately, Ukraine still does have 50 nations backing with drone manufacturing. So yeah, they're still ahead for now, anyways. Now, more and more of those drones are heading over it from both sides. It started with Russia, now it's on the Ukrainian side, into fiber optic cables. So the only way you're going to beat a fiber optic cable is if you can come up with an EMP weapon of some sort. There's different work.
Can you just explain what that is? An ANP weapon. What does that mean?
EMP, electromagnetic pulse. Now, electromagnetic pulse can be the standard electromagnetic pulse is what happens when a nuclear explosion happens. But you can simulate a localized EMP through large electrical discharges. Question is, how are you going to do it? So I've seen patents where even there was an American company that patented. Of course, I haven't made it yet, but they patented a concept of a air pressurized burst for an EMP, where basically you have a blank round in an M16, you have an EMP attachment up top of it, and the pressurized air from that blank round, it converts into electrical energy, and that shoots out a localized EMP. What it basically does is it creates an electromagnetic charge on the chips and on the wiring, and it just burns the chips out of whatever electronics that's not armored up. But you can't armor up a drone because then it can't fly. So you get one or two things. You get an armored drone that's not going to be affected by EMP, but it doesn't fly, or you get a drone that flies. That's about the only way you're going to deal with fiber optic drones, unfortunately, is to burn them out. Well, you shoot them out of the sky, obviously. That's a standard practice right now. But that's becoming more and more of a problem as it evolves. And the range on these things, even with fiber optics, is about 20 kilometers right now and growing. So, I mean, they're serious enough weapons, obviously. And you get really, really good feed off of them. It's no longer a blurry picture. You see right when it flies into something. You see the expression on the people's faces. So it's a very, very good feed on the fiber optics, obviously. And that's the situation right now.
Right. Okay. So let's just go a little bit forward, because I mean, the Ukrainians are trying to hold on to all of these positions, but they're about to lose Chasiv Yar. Pokrovsk is looking difficult. And we also have difficult situations coming with Slavyansk and Kramatorsk if Krasny Liman falls. What happens if all of these places fall? What happens to the Ukrainian positions if these cities, these towns, big towns, if Ukraine loses them? Where does that leave the war? I mean, you spoke about the Dnieper. Give us some idea of what the consequences of the loss of these places, what it would be.
Well, by law, as we know, by constitution, Russia cannot surrender a single square centimeter of territory that's now part of the Russian Federation. Zaporozhye is to the north. Zaporozhye is on the east side of the Dnieper, or the right bank, because if you're going down the Dnieper, as they used to go down, that was, the left bank, that was the left bank. For people to orient, when they say left bank, right bank, it's actually the opposite of what you're thinking, because people are going south down the river to trade, so they were looking at it that way. It's on the left bank. What happens if the center...
Can I just say, that's the east bank, to be clear. Yes, that is the east bank. No.
Zaporozhye city falls, and I'll say why. Because once the center bursts and the front moves up to the Dnieper in those areas, they're now going to be fighting a two-front war for the east and the south, with very limited logistical support from across the Dnieper. Only a couple bridges. So that's something that's they're not going to be able to hold long-term. Now, Kherson is on the west bank, on the right bank of the Dnieper, so that has to be crossed, and that has to be retaken. That's about half of Kherson Oblast is on the other side. Now, it looks like there's been a decision that obviously Kyiv doesn't want peace. Now, Russia is categorically against a ceasefire. That's not peace. That's a timeout. Timeout for the enemy to rearm, restock, resupply, get better positions, dig in further. That's just minus for Russia, plus for the West. There's no upside for Russia on this. And at this point, realistically, especially with the Russian people, nobody gives a damn what the West thinks. The Russian people want revenge, and they want blood, especially considering all the terrorist attacks, all the things that Kyiv has been committing. Threats on the parade, that's another one. The veiled threats that which are idiotic, past idiotic, but I think at this point, when you're dealing with a kid in power, you can just expect anything out of them. Because considering there's going to be 19 world leaders, maybe more, any attack on the parade is a declaration of war on multiple countries.
Yeah.
But, you know, you can expect anything from a kid, especially a desperate one like Zelensky, the narco Green Goblin. So you get that effect. But the problem is the war isn't going to end. I mean, that's obvious enough. Yeah. The Dnieper becomes a good barrier in certain areas because it's hard to cross. There's high ridges. Usually the high ridges are actually on the east bank just because of the way the river flows. But either way, I mean, coming down those barriers or going up those natural barriers across a very wide river is very difficult. It's very difficult to accomplish, especially when you're under fire. However, Sumy is already on the west side of the river. So Russia is already on the west side of the Dnieper that's in Ukraine, because the Dnieper goes up into Russia also. So it's already moving southwards towards Sumy. The logistics points are falling, and there's a lot of pressure on Sumy. What happens with Kharkov, that's a big question, because one of the reasons Russia was switching off the power in Kharkov, blasting it out, is for the people to leave. And a very large portion of that population has left. That means there's less human shields, there's less civilians in the way. It makes taking the city much, much easier. And it's actually, my opinion is there's not going to be a frontal assault on Kharkov. Kharkov is going to get surrounded, it's going to get starved, it's going to be besieged. So that the forces inside either surrender or the people themselves revolt, or they'll have to bail out of the city. And that's the way it looks. Once Krasny Limon falls, once the pressure's on Kramatorsk and Slavinsk, there's a straight shot to the south of Kharkov. Plus, there's now movement north of Kharkov, in Kharkovsk province, and it's starting to form the siege, the surrounding, which, by the way, it's now been, there's been commentary coming out that the Russians don't play fair. They won't attack us head on. They're encircling us. That's not fair. It's the same thing as if you remember in 23 with a great counteroffensive. The Russians weren't playing fair. They were shooting from the trees and the bushes instead of standing out in the open and shooting.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, no.
So
whatever.
Yes. Can I just ask a question? Because I don't know whether you know about it, but there's a rather interesting Ukrainian magazine, dissident Ukrainian magazine called Strana, which about 2 years ago actually said that if Ukraine loses Zaporozhye, which is a big industrial city, I mean, it's a city where they make the gas turbines, aircraft engines, motor vehicles. It's, one of the big industrial centers of the former Soviet Union, just to say. They lose Zaporozhye and they lose Dnipropetrovsk, which I believe is on the other bank. It's on the right bank, but perhaps you can explain that.
It's on both, but the majority is on the west bank.
West bank. But if it loses these two places, it's the end of Ukraine. Ukraine is not viable any longer. And that if they lose these two cities, the southern areas of the Black Sea coast, including Odessa, by the way, become untenable. Is that true? Undefendable. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely. The majority of trade, industrial production goes up and down the Dnieper. So Russia already holds the southern Dnieper. So once it takes Kherson, it'll hold fully the mouth of the Dnieper. It holds the northern Dnieper. So that portion that's in Ukraine, that's under pressure, once those cities fall, and let's not forget Kharkov. Kharkov is an industrial city. It's the second city in Ukraine by size. Once all of that falls, the question is, the question also becomes, would Kyiv vote to leave Ukraine? And here's the logic behind it. Kyiv is an imperial city. Even though it's a poor country, it was big enough to support Kyiv, and Kyiv liked to live large. I mean, if you ever travel to any Ukrainian cities before the conflict started, most of them were relatively poor, especially the villages were just desolate. Kyiv, that's where the money was. Now, what you're going to get is what you got with Vienna after the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. You got an agrarian Austria, very poor, which wanted to join Germany in 1918, but in Versailles, nobody was going to reward Germany with Austria for obvious reasons. You've got an imperial Vienna, and you've got a very poor country that needs to support imperial Vienna, and they couldn't support it. So Kyiv is going to get a choice of either being the first city in a very poor agrarian backwards country and watch its life quality of life collapse year after year, or be the third city in a very large prosperous country. Yeah. Now, that's going to be a very difficult choice for a lot of people. Do we want to be the really, really big fish in a really small puddle, or do we want to be the average fish in a very large ocean? Yeah. And I think eventually most people will go, well, life's better over there than what we've got.
Yes, I think we're getting a sense of the strategy and where all this is going. Now, can I just ask two last questions? Firstly, I noticed that Patrushev, who was Putin's national security advisor, who is still a member of the Security Council of Russia, and who is now in charge, by the way, of the shipbuilding industry and of building up Russia's fleet. He has started talking about Odessa. He's talked about Odessa being a Russian city, that it is alien to Ukraine, to the system in Ukraine, and about the fact that the people of Odessa want to be back with Russia again. If all of these events that we're talking about, and we don't know how long they're going to take, but if all of these things come together, will the Russians, if they reach Zaporozhye, move on towards Odessa? Is that something that it becomes possible? I've heard it said that it's very difficult to advance on Odessa from Kherson city, because there's lots of rivers and things of this kind, and that it's actually easier to advance on Odessa from further north. Is this all true? And is that a possible Russian objective? And the second question I wanted to just quickly ask is, are we looking at a very long time scale for all of these events? Or is it perhaps the case that if Liman and Chasiv Yar fall and Pakrovsk fall and the defense lines collapse, things will start to move more quickly? So two quick last questions. Well, two big last questions, I should say, not quick ones.
Well, and they're right. Moving directly from Kherson onto Odessa is very difficult because you're moving in low country along the coastline, and you're being threatened from your flank. So the first thing that has to happen is Nikolaev has to be taken, which is also a Russian city. Nikolaev is a threat to the right flank if you're moving by the coastline. And more likely, any move on Odessa would also have a element of marine landings. Under fire, true, but that's something that's going to threaten the control of the city, opens up an additional front line. So the question is, what will the French do? Because the French are sitting not that far away. Of course, if the French cross, into Ukraine, they become legitimate targets, and they're going to get a very unwelcome surprise. It's still about 150 or so kilometers to Odessa, and that's a long way under fire from Iskandars and direct fire from Kinzhals and anything else that's been launched either from the fleet or from aviation out of Crimea, especially if you can't suppress that aviation. So that's going to be, any thought of immunity is insane. I mean, just it's absolutely pipe dream, wishful thinking. And in that pipe dream, that light at the end of the pipe is not safety. That's a locomotive. That's a very large armored locomotive barreling down on them. So Odessa, something that's been going on for quite a while too in Odessa and Kyiv is the de-Russianification of Odessa by immigration. A lot of people from the western Ukraine, from Galicia, which is that culture that now got imposed on the rest of Ukraine, have been given apartments, have been migrated into those cities to try to dissolve that Russian population and make it into a minority. And the Russian population are the ones that are being, first and foremost, grabbed off the streets to be meat on the front line. So there's the Ukrainian powers are working on basically an extermination program for the Russian population, even the loyal Russian population. Anybody that's got the wrong last names gets to go die on the front line. They're not doing as much recruiting, not the heavy-handed recruiting in Lvov or in Zakarpattia and those areas. Zakarpattia is a whole different cake, too, because you've got a large Hungarian population. Hungary's already said they're ready to move in if they started trying to do force recruitment like they did in 23 on the Hungarians there, who all hold Hungarian passports additionally. So you start getting into really difficult areas for Ukraine in general. So that's that. How long it'll go, it's hard to say. There's because a lot of factors in play. Once the main lines of fortification are fully breached, obviously the run-up is going to be much easier. Russia's already in Sumy on the western side of the Dnieper. So it all depends, A, how much Russia is willing to suffer casualties for a fast charge. Because the forces are there. They're being reserved. I know units have been that do rotations on the front lines. That's something Ukrainians can't afford. Brigades and battalions will do rotations. They'll do fighting for 3-4 months, half a year. They're pulled off to recover, rest, and recover, and another battalion takes their place for the next half a year of fighting while they're recruiting and they're recovering. So there is rotations. Plus, it's a level of skill that's being built up that's then spread out to the rest of the army. It's 600,000 men that are involved in Ukraine out of an army of 1.5 million and growing. So the more than half the army is not directly involved in Ukraine at this time. Some of them have been rotated out, and new units are rotated in to get bloodied, so they get the combat experience that they otherwise don't have. And the rest of them are waiting for NATO. A lot of the newest equipment that are going in, just last year, just as an example, last year, Russia doubled its tank production. I'm talking brand new from zero scratch built tanks from 200 to 400, and it's going to go up even more. Rheinmetall last year built 8 tanks from scratch. I mean, granted, their capacity is going to grow, but you're looking at maybe 20, 30 tanks in all of NATO last year to 400 in Russia. As a large way to grow. And Russia's not standing still. It's expanding its manufacturing base quite a bit, and shell manufacturing base, and et cetera, which is already pretty high, plus North Korea. So already there's problems. There's obvious lack of problems. The only way that NATO can compose any kind of help to Ukraine in equipment is to start buying in large quantities American equipment. Now, the U.S. has about 2,500 M1 tanks and about another 2,500 M1A1 tanks that are parked. The M1s are being upgraded to M1A1 minus. That is, they don't get the Chobane armor, which the U.S. stole from the British. They don't get the Chobane armor, but they do get the upgraded 120 millimeter smoothbore cannon versus the 105 rifle, which even in 1980, when it came out, it wasn't adequate to fight a T-72. It was already behind the times. So the M1A1 came out in 86 into mass production, and it had the 120 millimeter main gun. So they will be getting that. And I think that's going to be, Trump's going to win no matter what. His best case in this case is to leave Ukraine and continue being the arms dealer to the EU that's now fully involved in Ukraine. Because the EU's got a long way before they can up their production to do anything even close to Russia's level. I mean, they have to have fully militarized their economies. But the U.S. has these huge parking lots of tanks and Bradleys and Paladins and so on that it can sell, and it would prefer to sell. Giving it to Ukraine is just you don't get any money for that. you give them a present, and it's not coming back as anything but scrap metal. Give it to Europe, it's payment up front. So that's another way to control Europe is to suck the money out of them in this way, plus the fuel cost. So it all depends on what the level of support from Europe is, whether France or any of these other willing partners decide to actually really get involved or not, and the tolerance for casualties on the Russian side for a fast, hard attack. The units are there. There are 2 tank armies ready to go. They haven't been thrown in. The advantage on a tank attack, yes, the first days you're going to be, maybe the first week, you're going to be suffering very heavy casualties. But once you've run through those initial positions, the front lines, you've ripped it open, the casualty rates go down very, very quickly. It's the enemy that now is running. And as we know from history, and we know now, the main casualties in any combat and conflict on a larger scale we're talking about is when an enemy breaks and starts to run. Because that's when they're getting hunted down and destroyed as they're running away. And once that happens, anything is possible. What Europe does when that happens, or NATO does when it happens, is also a big question. And I think that's been the biggest fear in Moscow, is not to expand the conflict by moving too fast. But because there was still hope for some kind of a solution, diplomatic solution. But I think those hopes are now being basically evaporated out. It's becoming obvious that there is not going to be any negotiated solution with Europe. And, gentlemen, I just came back from Donetsk. I was up in Gorlovka. And just to understand what Gorlovka, 11 years, I mean, I did a video that was on RT, a report on a market. We were the only ones that got to that market. Market on a Sunday, got hit by a 155 millimeter artillery round. Thank God it was hit on the edge, so there weren't that many people there. And it's become obvious, I think, to everybody in power that this is just how it's going to be. It's not something that you can negotiate away, because unfortunately, there's no real actors or true actors on the other side. Well, I mean, as far as we're acting in good faith, actors, there's plenty of those actors, and plenty of bad faith. And we're not going to buy beads like the Indians did up in New York. So they're not going to give us shiny beads to calm us down and then start it up again. And anybody believing in Western friendship and so on, it's gone. That train's left the station. The station's burned down. It's not coming back.
Stanislav, thank you very much for your thorough answers to my questions. Thank you. We'll
Absolutely.
see what happens over the next few weeks.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Stanislav. One more time, where can people find you? One more time.
Okay, so we got on YouTube, it's Mr. Slavic Man, all one word, with a K instead of a C. And I'm shadow banned, so I don't pop up in the lists very often or at all. On Telegram, Stas Todaya Obratna is the Russian one in English, written in English. And Stas was there is the English language. And if anybody wants to get in contact with me directly, leave a comment and leave your contacts, and I'll drop you a line. I read all the comments. So.
All right. Those links are in the description box. Thank you, Stanislav.
Thank you.
Take care.